Okay, so just a warm welcome to over 100 registrations and participants from 60 organizations. So there is a wealth of expertise, variety of experiences in this room, and I'm really hoping that will come through the chat. I know that you don't have the ability of speaking because the mic is muted because we've got so many participants, but we really am hoping that the online chat is going to be just as exciting as what the panel will present. So from organizations, from over 60 organizations from Australia, New Zealand, and also Singapore, and a few from the US. So just a quick one about LearningCafe, and for those who know LearningCafe, we've been kind of around for the past 8 years. And it's all around organization, the practice and the science of organizational learning. And this is a community that is focused around making that better through webinars, our unconference catch-ups, coffee catch-ups, and workshops. You would have noticed in the past 8 months we've kind of quietened down, and the reason for that is kind of just the word they use is pivot, to say we were revisiting our value proposition, and I think we've kind of found a newer value proposition that we're going to focus on, and I shall share with you in the next 60 minutes or so. We got three. The structure of the webinar really is that we've got 3 panels of 30 minutes each, and they'll kind of blend into each other. Each panel comprises of practice leaders, which I'll introduce you at the start of each panel. So it'll kind of flow from one session to the other. So we've got a great cast of practice leaders. Just a quick one. So you should be able to see, when you see the whiteboard, you should be able to see the drawing tools on your left-hand side. Feel free to type. So if you use the T and place a cursor and type, it'll type on the whiteboard. There are polls and also the webinar chat available for you to participate. Okay, so let's go to the first panel, and this one's actually interesting because I think this is the first time we're kind of very consciously discussing organizational learning and its role and contribution to the future of work. And I couldn't have found a better panel for this, comprising of 3 practitioners who have a lot of experience and also been part of LearningCafe for the past 6 years. So we're very, very thankful for that, and for taking the time out from their really busy schedules to participate in the panel. So the panel comprises of Murray Howard. Murray Howard is the head of learning in Lend-Lease, and also Anish Lalchandani, who is the global head of talent learning and culture optimization at the Standard Chartered Bank from Singapore. So Anish, a special thanks to you for participating from Singapore, and Darren Fox, whom, if you've participated in the LearningCafe and conferences, has been a regular presenter, but has recently moved from a narrower scope of learning to a more wider scope in terms of workforce strategy and planning. So from Sydney Water. So I really have a panel here that is going to be a great mix. So I would like to welcome Marie, Anish, and Darren. Thanks for joining us. Okay, so let's share some statistics that you participated in when you registered for this webinar. And the first one is actually a happy statistic. 53% of you who responded said that the learning spend is going to increase next year. 41% said it'll remain the same, and only 6% said it'll decrease. So it's actually quite a happy statistic, and this is up from 46% who said it's going to increase last year. So there is a positive mood in the learning and development community after, I think, a couple of years of budget cuts. So it's looking positive, and when we come to the panel, ask them about their opinion on what's happening in their organization, but also why they think that the learning spend is increasing. The second statistic actually is probably a happier one, maybe not for such happy reasons, but for us learning and development professionals, 80%, which is 80%, said that the desire for employees to upgrade their own skills has increased, right? So 30%, 39% said somewhat, but a fairly significant 41% said increase substantially. And again, when we cut over to the panel, I'd really like to kind of know what's happening in their organization. One of the things driving this really interest in updating own skills, maybe all the discussion around artificial intelligence and moving to a contingent workforce, which are quite integral part of the future of work. So it'll be quite interesting to check with the panel on this. So I think this is where I'm going to ask the question to the panel. I guess is learning function, is it being proactive enough, or it's still kind of in a reactive mode to support the future of work? And if it is in a reactive mode, how can we kind of become more proactive? But before I hand over to the panel for their answers, let's have a look at what is the definition of future of work, because there are thousands of definitions of future of work. But essentially, this slide, this image kind of shows a future of work that's going to a more contingent workforce. It's nimble, agile. There's plenty of technology, and there's also kind of the need for lifelong reinvention and learning, right? So it's kind of just moving into a more fluid space. So I think I'll kind of now ask the panel, and probably Marie, start with you in terms of number one, the stats that we shared. Are you finding that the desire for employees to learn in Lend-Lease and the other organizations you're across, do you see that increasing? And then how are you preparing for the future of work? So Marie, over to you. Okay, Marie, I think we've got some audio issues. I might actually just get Anish. Anish, if you want to answer the question.
Sure, Jeevan. I think the statistics are interesting, and if I look at banking or even our organization, I think it's quite a similar trend. If not the same numbers, possibly. And I think you're right. There's an aspect around people becoming far more aware, reading about news around AI, changing nature of jobs, and that is kind of prompting people to really start thinking about what would the future look like. Yeah. And it is not very clear. And I think what I'm seeing a trend is that is making them a bit more jittery around, let's really understand this better, what it means for me as an individual, and what it would mean for me to be ready for the future. So we see a lot of interest. We recently kind of did some work within our innovation center and kind of talked about future capabilities and future skills. And there was just so much of interest to kind of really find out what it is. And I think there's a lot of awareness. People really want to learn, and I think they may not be very clear about, what would it look like, but they are able to kind of slowly see, how with learning, they can actually help to, be kind of ready or be kind of agile enough to kind of see how it shapes up in the future. So I think the trends are there. There's a lot of focus we are having internally around, future skills and emerging technologies, in terms of either it is AI or blockchain in the banking. But fundamentally, there's a big piece. What we also realize is it is all about people, culture, and mindsets. Yeah. And I think I see a very positive and good trend in that direction, I would say.
Thanks, Anish. I think Marie is online now. Marie, you there?
Hi, Jeevan. Is that better?
Yep, we can hear you. Yes, we can hear you.
Now? Great. I think the issue for Lend-Lease has actually been around who are our learners and who are our learners going forward. And so we've actually taken a look at not only how do we communicate to our white-collar office-based workers, but more and more around how do we communicate to all of our people who work out on site, our subcontractors, and that kind of gig economy that we're going to need to have a relationship with. And so that's why very much when we look at learning, we're actually looking at how do we create an environment where all people at Lend-Lease can learn. And that all people phrase is actually changing every day in terms of who that is. So that's actually been quite a big focus of ours. The other thing for us is we're a global organisation, but even in Australia, our people work quite remotely. They work out on roads, they work out in remote sites. So how do we have access to them and how do we keep a relationship with them? So, and that's actually been quite challenging for the organisation, which has been a traditional engineering organisation. So introducing new concepts and new channels and the way in which people will learn is actually quite different for the business. So that's kind of been the big shift in there and getting ready for the future.
And Marie, just in terms of the desire for employees within the organization to learn, have you kind of either got evidence or you kind of intuitively know that is there a hunger for more learning?
If we look at our people survey or our engagement survey as we call it, absolutely there's a desire for people to have access to information to kind of mitigate the ambiguity that's out there in the workforce and where the workforce is going. One of the challenges that I will say that we have found is that in trying to get to some parts of our workforce, we're actually bumping into a whole range of industrial relations issues, which have quite surprised us. So more in terms of if you want to make learning available, track learning, things like that. The employees are keen to learn, but some of the industrial instruments and some of the unions that we have to deal with not necessarily as keen, and I didn't expect to find that. So that's interesting. It's kind of like the old world meeting the...
Thanks, Marie. Yeah, for sure. I think I'll get Darren in now. Darren, especially from, I guess, you kind of looking at from a workforce strategy and kind of been in learning for a long time before. Love to hear your views about the role that learning plays within the workforce strategy and getting the organization ready for the future.
Yeah. So I'll be brief, I'll just sort of expand on what both the presenters said before, but in terms of Sydney Water's context, I've been in either in the capability role or the head of HR role up until a month ago. And in the 2 years that I've been here, we've been trying to break the back of this addiction to classroom traditional training. And we've made some headway. But in terms of even the sort of the longer term, the view of the capability team and the learning team is thinking even beyond the individual learner and thinking about how do we actually structure things in terms of our procedures, process, or even our workflow so that the organization in itself can learn. So not just the individuals, but how do the organization learn? Over the next 5 to 10 years, there's some very major new types of projects that Sydney Water will be getting involved in to build infrastructure with the community, which I can't get into detail. But let's use the example around, say, Bitcoin. So can learning as a function, can the learning team actually build within workflow ways that once we actually start trialing, say, Bitcoin, that we actually learn from that experience and that the learning is actually socialized through that experience. And so by building key milestones of major project delivery within a company, can you actually say that's a major learning event? And how do we actually pivot around that learning and socialize that learning? And if I were to summarize the learning strategy for the next 5 years at Sydney Water, it's very much based around that.
Thanks, Darren. And I know that we've got a presentation both from Marie and Darren and they'll share a few thoughts in that. I guess one of the questions I did want to ask, and this has been my observation in pretty much every organization I've worked in, and it might be different in yours, but I've kind of seen that the HR functions have kind of become fairly siloed. And have and in the end, I guess it really is about the employee. But I get a feeling that the experience that employee gets, whether it's from learning or from performance or talent development, it seems to be a little bit fragmented. Would any of the panelists either agree or disagree with that and have their views?
Sure, I can start. So I think. Okay, so I think one of the fundamental problems is, yes, that does occur. Most organizations I've worked in, there does seem to be this siloed approach. I think part of it is the traditional Ulrich model, around centers of excellence and business partners that maintain the relationship. And I think that was meant to remove silos, but I think it's actually made them worse. So there is this sort of who owns the relationship with the business. However, on the other side, in terms of what we're trying to do here, I mean, it's kind of interesting. It's a funny thing happened to me on the way to the webinar. Is that I had to go through the processes of getting this presentation signed off because I'm representing Sydney Water. And the comms person said, shouldn't you make this more relevant to an L&D audience? You're focusing too much on workforce strategy. And I was actually floored for a moment. I couldn't understand what she was talking about. But then I realized, well, we don't actually see a differentiation between L&D and HR and workforce strategy. You can't just simply look at changing the capability of a function or a team organization without actually looking at all the systems and processes and procedures and structures and labor force changes, and then expect that a change is going to happen in terms of lift of capabilities. So at Sydney Water, we are trying to break down those silos. We've got a ways to go, but it's not a separate strategy. It's a one singular workforce strategy that combines structure, policy, procedures, and capability, and so forth.
Sure. Thank you very much, and I think we'll cover that in your slide, Darren. Anish, any thoughts? And Marie? Anish first.
It's actually Marie here. Oh, okay, sorry.
Thanks, Jeevan. Go ahead, Marie, go ahead.
Oh, okay. I think for me it's not as neat as Darren's world. I wish that it was. We actually have quite a large centre of excellence function, and we found ourselves shifting from a learning delivery function far more into a change enablement function, and actually having to, as Darren described, create that link between all of the various pieces of HR, from reward to resourcing to development to talent, to make sure that any of the initiatives that we're driving really have proper impact to the business. The other thing that I would find is that we used to have a separate consulting arm into the business, and we're finding more and more that consulting arm, which identifies the issue and escalates the need for further development to occur, is now it's merged with the HR business partner role. And I can actually see that going forward. I think Darren's right. The Ulrich model needs to evolve so as not to have such separate silos. And the role of the HR business partner to the learning partner I see as integrating. What I do see is different is usually the delivery channel, which is becoming far more digital and, as I said, part of more creating that learning environment. But unless we engage with HR from end to end in the life cycle, our initiatives won't have any business impact. Over to you, Anish.
Thank you, Marie. Yep, Anish?
I think, for us, we definitely have, different centers of excellence and different teams within HR. But I think what unites us is our one people strategy, which links around everything around from talent, performance, employee relations, and, OD point of view. But I think of late, what we've also seen is with the employee experience lens, and we started to think quite a lot in that aspect in terms of who's our client, whom are we talking about? Is it the employee, the people leaders? And, that has helped us to kind of integrate a lot of effort. Though there are still different teams, but when we talk about specific events, and I'll take an example of something which we did last year, was we have a performance kind of cycle, and we said mid-year would be, a performance and a career conversation. And what we saw was, the performance team, the talent team, the development team, the comms team, all coming together, create that integrated experience. So I see things changing purely because we started to think about employee experience, but lot much work to be done.
Wonderful. I'm actually now going to hand it over to Marie to walk through a couple of slides on what's happening in Lend-Lease. So Marie, over to you.
Yep, Okay. One of the things that I found when I looked at Lend-Lease and kind of where the business is at now and what development had been focused versus where Lend-Lease needs to be for the future and the future strategy, and given the changing nature of work, is, and I've mentioned it a couple of times, that need for us to create an environment where people can build the skills and capabilities they need to be their best. That sounds, fairly normal in what you'd experienced, but for us it was, what did we need to put in that learning environment to really shift the organisation? So overlaying the top of that is, what are the key frameworks? We've actually had a look at our capabilities frameworks. We've gone from 167 capabilities down to 8, which are grounded in the future of work and the Lend-Lease future strategy, setting them into something quite simple that can be used as a guidepost for our employees to focus their development in the areas that are important for Lend-Lease. Similarly, in playing that, our environment is to create all the mechanisms to support development in those areas. So making sure that we're using the subject matter experts that are available within the business, that we have ready-to-go digital assets, ready-to-go workshops, so we're able to turn those on and off, be they internal or external as we need to. Really focusing those core capability areas that are relevant for our industry into Lend-Lease bespoke solutions for the right areas. How we actually drive a social networking and the knowledge sharing across Lend-Lease, which is required in a global construction organisation. Aligning all of our, as we said, our performance and our reward and our just-in-time tools, and making sure that we've got a proper panel of coaches and mentors that are available for our people. Now, all of that is required to be set up to allow those capabilities to be delivered. One of the interesting things for us, as I said, is looking at what are those channels for delivery. We're looking at what is digital, where does blended play, how do we get to our remote employees, and more importantly, how do we turn learning from an event into a campaign? And that's really shifting for the organisation. It's quite funny, it was taking us quite a while to really get focused on acceptance of each of the pieces that needed to be in our learning environment. And we then actually kicked off the project to implement Workday Learning along with Workday as our people system. And it kind of strangely enough made people realise we didn't have very much sexy content to put on our system, and we were kind of able to bring our learning environment to life. So when we go live at the end of February next year, we'll actually be shifting the way learning is delivered completely in Lend-Lease. So not focusing on the platform, but more about the world of learning that's contained within there. The other thing that I think is really important to call out in this space, and especially as you go forward for the future, is that we're actually working on a whole learning awareness campaign. We started with what we call develop new festivals in our different locations and our different large-scale projects, which is we actually created awareness from across the business, not just what our function does, but what other functions do, that is available for people to leverage their own development. People didn't know that a lot of those opportunities existed, and thought the only thing they could do was look up the learning catalogue, find a course and see if they could get on that. Secondly, as we go forward and we're launching with our new way of learning, we're actually embarking upon quite a different and fresh campaign that will be a video campaign that will go out globally to all of our staff. It won't talk about necessarily Workday Learning, it won't necessarily targeting that we're using LinkedIn Learning or other managed mentors, but we'll actually focus more broadly on just the way Lend-Lease learning is changing. There's a few key reasons for that, and this is the culture shift that we're trying to make as the organisation. In the past, we've pushed out the learning that we believe people needed to know in the organisation. Going forward, we've got 3 levels that we're trying to drive. The first one is to create a curiosity of learners to actually go in and search for learning. Rather than providing links to people to what learning is available, we want to actually move to an environment where we say, just type in the search bar this topic, because we know the content we've got available externally to us will continue to change. But we need to get people engaged and create that curiosity. The second part is actually creating the leader-led approach. Show leaders that it's easy, that they too can access, they too can drive their people towards some of those really quick and easy solutions to find. And the third part is really focusing on those areas that are important to Lend-Lease. What is it critical to our strategy and our future that we really need to make sure that the right people have a Lend-Lease focus on what it is that they're doing. So previously, as I said, we would have only have had the lend-lease focus. Now we're moving far more into the leader-led and creating the curiosity. It sounds easy, but lend-lease is very used to being in control and driving out learning. So it's quite a shift for not only the learning team, but for the P&C team in general, and very much for the organisation. So early days, but yeah, we're off and running, and I'm determined to kind of put my head down and make sure we get there. Thanks, Chica.
Murray, thank you very much. And look, if you know, this slide was a menu, I just like the variety and the dishes on there. It's catering for, you know, pretty much everything. I can imagine it must be it's a lot of hard work to put that into place. But we move on now to Darren Fox. So Darren, over to you.
Okay, thank you. So you could just move to the next slide, Jeevan. So just a bit of history. City Water has been on a change program since 2011 to take us out to 2020. And that 2020 agenda is about then getting us ready for an even bigger transformation. For the last number of years, it's been about efficiency, being more effective, getting our technology up to date and whatnot, being more cost effective. 2011, City Water had 10,000 employees. We now have 2,500. 80% of all expenditure is actually then with private organizations who we've outsourced a lot of our work to. So City Water, what's left is a very sort of, you know, as much of a core of 2,500 people can be. But the work that I'm doing now, so a number of people across City Water have been seconded into a long-term strategy team to look at strategy out to essentially for the next 3 years, 5 years, 10 years, and up to 2040. Now, the reason being is that the way we're not the only ones, how infrastructure is done has to change. It's getting too expensive to meet the needs of a city that's growing at the speed of Sydney. So we have to change how we do things and work together in more of a partnership and a collaborative way. So in terms of preparation of that and the work I've done before, I do a lot of research in terms of the future of the workforce. And look, every time you talk to someone or research something, you get a different sort of view of what the future is. But what I've found is that there are some consistent themes happening over and over again. And these are some of the consistent ones. I might just jump to the complexity one. So, and this is a significant driver, is that, you know, things are getting more complex. They're getting more uncertain. What drives complexity is one of the things is the increased interaction of a number of variables out in the environment. And with increased interaction and interrelationships, what happens is that it gets harder and harder to predict how any one event could impact something in the future. So it becomes imperative in that so there's no one expert in a complex environment could see a solution. So collaboration is becoming more and more important to bring experts from a number of different fields, if not unrelated fields, who have their perspective and bring that perspective to try and identify a solution to a problem that's hard to define. And typically, we've heard of the things, I think they're called wicked problems. And part of that's being driven by the interaction between climate change, technology, aging population, and so forth. So key to Sydney Water is going to be this idea of how do we collaborate more effectively across a number of agencies, so internally and externally. Another key theme is the need to manage increased diversity. So any individual manager at any one time more than likely is going to have quite a mix of employees of different ages, different tenure, different cultural backgrounds, different work arrangements, be they around you know, full-time, part-time, casual, whatnot. People who prefer to work in the gig economy. City Water, like I said before, we have just as many employees who are outsourced through 3 different partners as we actually have employees under the Sydney Water's payroll. The next key theme that a lot of the you know, people who read the crystal ball is saying that the learning organization, building a learning organization, and, you know, Marie was talking about this as well, this need to encourage and create a desire for lifelong learning. The reason being is that L&D teams probably won't ever be able to keep up anymore because the need for skill change is going to change so fast. So the skills that you need today are going to be different from the skills that you need later today. And so how do you actually build that connection and the environment and the ecosystem that allows people to get the learning when they need and figure it out? And the role of L&D is how do they actually build that into the workflow of the organization. Another key theme is disruption preparedness. So just having to be more, how do you build the capability in people and in the organization to be more adaptable, agile, and just get speed to market. Another key driver is, we're seeing it happening already, is this idea of hyper-customization, which is increasing customer expectations. So the best example that I use every day is things like Netflix or Spotify, where the services that we use are learning from the service and are fine-tuning that service for us automatically, and is creating a very sort of high expectation in terms of getting what I want when I want it, and probably apps knowing what I want before I even know myself. And then finally, of course, the last key theme is technology. That is the fundamental driver of all the sort of future of the workforce conversations. It is a bit of a bugbear for me because there's really creating two schools of thought. One's saying everyone's going to lose their job, robotics is going to take over everything, and whatnot. And, there's all sorts of numbers being bandied about. And then there's another one saying, which is the school that I'm part of, is that in actual fact, robotics, automation, AI is going to increase more opportunities because what it does is the technology removes a lot of the routine work, gets rid of and creates opportunity to create more value. And the two examples I always use is for those who've lived long enough to remember having to go to a bank and talk to a bank teller to get your cash. When bank machines started arriving, everyone thought no one was going to need bank tellers anymore. Well, in actual fact, there's more bank tellers than ever. The reason because those ATMs have created a situation where they don't have to deal with the day-to-day and are actually add more value. Another good example would be when digital cameras came out. Everyone thought, who's going to need a professional photographer anymore? Well, in actual fact, there's more photographers than there's ever been because the technology creates more opportunities than it takes away. So how is City Water planning to respond to this? So again, unfortunately, I can't share too much because unfortunately, this is the approach that we're taking, which is signed off by the board on Monday, and something's happened to my slide here. Don't know what happened, Ethan. So, and unfortunately, it's a bit of a sanitized slide. It's a bit generic, but I'll talk through it. So, like I said, I'm talking about 5 years and 10 years a time window here. Our core challenge is how do we actually collaborate to deliver on creating a livable city or sustainable and thriving community, and how in the role that water can play with that. So the number of stakeholders that City Water has to deal with is surprisingly significant. It's very complex. And what's happened in the past is that City Water would just come into the table and we'd do a project or suburb by suburb. That's not going to work anymore. It has to be a holistic, systemic plan in terms of how does this city, how do we plan to build the city over the long term in a very integrated way. That's not how different agencies have done it before, and the different government agencies have to start coming together. And so our experts have to collaborate a lot more effectively and build relationships and come to the table with almost a blank piece of paper and design this community and the plans for the community. So the core question then is that our key agenda was becoming more customer-centric. Probably after 2020, it's how to become more customer-centric or community-centric. How do we think to make decisions around the community as a system across Sydney as opposed to suburb or street by street or building by building. In order to do that, fundamentally, we believe that we have to build a learning organization. And many of the things that Marie was talking about is that some of the stuff that we have to seriously start looking at is how do we build that ecosystem that allows people and the organization itself almost as a sentient being to pivot and learn based on some very key sort of projects, massive projects that will be happening at City Water. So because of that, we already have access to the technical skills mostly. The skills have to lift because of the grander scope and greater complexity, because we're not, again, it's not suburb by suburb anymore. It is a community perspective. But what we're finding is that we need to develop the EQ and the soft skills of our experts and the people that go out and talk to different agencies and the community and the councils or whatnot. That's the thing that we find that we really need to focus on, and how to. And what we're finding is any organization is probably looking at that, because, like I said, complexity is not unique to Sydney Water. This idea for building up your soft skills is becoming even more important than technical skills is becoming quite common. Very much I think an advantage that Sydney Water has is our purpose. So in terms of what we do to build a sustainable, thriving community, the importance of water, and how we make sure that water is available to everybody cheaply, and the role that water can play in creating a thriving, green, and sustainable community is important. And if we could find a way to wrap that purpose through our workflow, through our processes, through our systems, communicate that externally, that has a huge value proposition for us in terms of trying to attract the technical, passionate people that we're going to need for the future. I guess the last two things in terms that we need to consider at Sydney Water is, we're essentially a company built on the backs of engineers. We think like engineers. We're an incredibly science-based organization. And so we need to sort of figure out how do we loosen the boundaries of our structures and our processes and our procedures that allow people and teams to move around dealing with problems and opportunities. And that includes moving in and out of the different agencies that we work with. And how do we actually expedite that? Because some of our policies hinder that. And there's been a couple of recent examples where people have come in to work at City Water from another agency, and we had to send them back because our policy or payroll just couldn't deal with that particular instance. So I think that's fundamentally it. Hopefully I kept down to, I'm not sure if I kept it to 5 minutes. I think I went over time. I'm not sure how you want to handle questions, Jeevan.
I think we'll kind of move on to the next panel because we're just about 10 minutes late. But look, I think it's always the challenge with this kind of a presentation with 7 experienced panelists with so much information. We could have run a webinar on each of the panelists. So Darren, thank you very, very much for your presentation. There's a very interesting conversation happening in the webinar chat, so feel free to jump in, everyone there. But I'd like to move on to kind of the next panel, which is around designing for effectiveness, because design in learning is kind of central to what we do. And with everything that Murray, Anish, and Darren have talked about how learning needs to change, design is obviously going to be impacted. So it's my great pleasure to actually welcome back Vanessa Blewett to the panel. And Vanessa is a very popular presenter and really one of the leading specialists on learning effectiveness, intelligence. So hopefully I'm using the terms right, Vanessa. And also welcome Ben Carr from EY. Ben also has a great amount of expertise with designing learning. So very keen to hear from both of you. So welcome, Vanessa, and welcome, Ben.
Thank you.
Thank you.
So a couple of stats, and I've cheated a little bit because these stats are actually from last year. In the 2017 survey, we asked the question why the learning solutions weren't being designed as effectively as they should, and 41% said they were kind of being designed in silos. So I think the implication there is that the designers is kind of just exist in their own little bubble and design, and that's kind of also we talked about the silos within HR and basically not putting the learner in the center. 24% said poor implementation, 20% said improper analysis, which it resonates with me, and 15% said ineffective design. But that's quite interesting to see that a majority said designing solutions in our learning design silos. So I guess the question to the panel is, Ben, what have you kind of seen? What's changed substantially in design? I know there's a lot of talk and blogs, and I guess a lot of hype around design, AR, VR. But what's happening on the ground? So Ben, if you can, kind of start with you.
Yep.
What do you think?
First of all, just to check, can you hear me fine?
Yes. Yes.
Great.
Ben.
Okay.
Right.
So I guess it's one of those things where a lot has changed in the last, and even beyond the last 2 years, last couple of years, but even beyond that, social learning platforms, as you mentioned, VR, AR, these are all things that are coming through. And I think it's one of those things that a lot of this takes a lot of time to settle. And we're starting to see some of the things, some of the older platforms settle a little bit better. But I feel like, working as an advisor to organizations about learning, design and development, we had a lot of people over the years who come and they always want the latest thing, but the implementation doesn't quite work. And that probably comes to that first point that you mentioned on a couple of the points actually on that last slide. Some of the design happens in silo, but people are so excited about the technology, they want to get it out there and want to start using it before they really understand how to do it. And that leads to a bit of a design outside of the business context and the purpose behind actually what you're trying to achieve with it. I think what we're starting to see is some of that settling a little bit. One of the things that actually, where all of the topics from today's session are kind of overlap is really a strong conversation around user experience and learning. It's around a kind of a, not just learning, but it goes back to knowledge management, to how your portal works, how does self-service work within an organization, how do all these things fit together, how do you present it as a single interface, or how do you smooth the process so that people aren't going to learning, and there's a bit of a mindset around, or there used to be a bit of a mindset around learning is the classroom. This is one of those things that a lot of organizations still really kind of focus on. They're still really struggling to move away into some of the more, someone's written up micro-learning here, some of the more agile types of learning processes. But those things are so much harder to measure and to gauge. And I think there's a lot of people that think of learning, how do you measure it? How do you judge what's happening within an organization? I think they're getting a lot smarter about it, but they're realizing there's a lot more happening out there. And how do you bring it all back together and capture it all in one spot? You talk of CPDs in past years as a measurement for how much learning is happening within your organization, but it's not necessarily teaching the skills that you need. And how do you measure it and line it back to your greater HR and organizational strategies, which was some of the points that were talked about in the last session. So I'm thinking.
Thanks. Yep. No, thanks, Ben. And over to Vanessa. Vanessa, your thoughts?
Yeah, on that one, what I still see here, talking to Jivan's point before about siloed, all of these are quite L&D centric. So a big thing that I've been pushing with a learning effectiveness view and been piloting is co-creation or designing with the business for the business. So really stepping away from what I feel is a somewhat paternalistic view when it comes to figuring out what it is the business needs and really making learning being business driven and L&D enabled. And it is, I've got to say, it's a challenging shift for my L&D colleagues as well. But what it really does do is it really gets people to buy in and has some happy side effects, such as once they agree as a business team, what does success look like, for example? It's if you say you've come to me and said we need resilience training, for example, and you say 6 months from now I'm going to come back to you and say, was this training successful? What are you going to think about? And that becomes your design components. And what I've found is that when you ask questions like that, the business and particularly senior leaders start to challenge themselves to say, well, what can I do to make that desired end state happen? So is it that I need to coach more, or I need to sponsor harder, or I need to get involved? And it stops this handoff between L&D designing something, getting a sign-off, or often getting into this protracted argument around, well, it wasn't what I wanted or what I expected. So from a design perspective, I guess that's something that we're trying to promote a lot within Nestlé, and particularly with our very senior programs, and not put the ball back in the court, but to take that partnership view across the board. So that's something that we're doing structurally to help to do that as well. And as you were saying, really focus on, yes, we are still quite focused on our structured development solutions that sit in our LMS when it comes to measuring. That said, we record around 10.5 million hours of activity in our LMS per year. So it is significant investment, but we're really, and you'll see in my slides, working to get to the core of what is it that we need to know about each piece of learning and deep diving into analytics at a deeper level if something doesn't look quite right or where we can leverage insights.
Thanks, Vanessa. And you know what you've said actually resonates with me quite a bit. In the next panel, I'll be talking about learner experience or workforce experience and how it fundamentally changes the way that we do things, but that's for next panel. So thank you very much for your response. Another quick stat that you see on your screen is that's kind of resonating with what pretty much everyone has said, but particularly what Ben and Vanessa mentioned, is that the unstructured organizational learner seems to be increasing. 54% have said it's kind of the same, but 42% did see an increase. So we're kind of moving from this really structured, controlled environment to one where there is, it's a little bit more dispersed and a little bit more, smaller chunks, and I guess it's a little bit difficult to control. And it's probably something that I'd ask Vanessa once the presentation begins. Is can we really control at the same time give learners what they want? So it just seems that it becomes more difficult to measure, so something which would be quite interesting.
Just quickly on that one, it becomes a question. I'd flip it and say, why do we need to control everything? Is that us justifying our own existence? If we have a true learning organisation, especially when you've got self-curated content, how am I adding value? We have to ask where we're adding value.
Now that is a question we shouldn't be asking. It might scare people away from this session, but no, that's good. No, I can't agree with you more. 100% with you on that. So, look, kind of again, just coming on that is that Vanessa, for you, and we'll move to your presentation soon. Is that you're very right. We're kind of moving from this monolithic, structured environment to one where it's kind of micro and it's personalized, and I guess would love to hear your thoughts on. I guess the first question you asked was, why do we need to track everything? I agree with you. We probably don't need to. It's difficult, and it is also a cost to measurement. And to be honest, we don't even use the results very well. So we'll actually move on to your presentation, Vanessa. I would love to kind of hear what you're doing at Nestle. So over to you.
Okay. So here we have how I guess my role came to being and what our focus is, and it is answering the question: what is the value of learning and development investments? And you can see in the middle there a great cartoon that really is talking about, well, whose value is it anyway? So really you have our very earnest L&D person talking about the fantastic news that completion rates are on the way up and we're getting beautiful feedback. So the classic L&D centric insights, but meanwhile what's happening in the business isn't what the business wants at all, which really led us to, I guess, have the aha moment of, we're in business, not education, and I think that, when we're talking about water, that message is really strong. In Nestle as well, I wouldn't say it's as strong as I'd like it to be, but this is what I'm pushing, and it's not that people know stuff. It really is, we should be about enabling a change in performance that is aligned to business results. So we can deliver learning that gets completed. We can deliver learning that gets fantastic feedback. But if it wasn't the right learning for the right people at the right time, it won't deliver results. So we need to be clear on what it is we want people to do and move away from objectives that talk about, at the end of this, you'll know this and know that. To that, I'll say, so what? Jivan hears me say that a lot. Because so what? What does that actually deliver? And getting back to the concept that in any transaction, the supplier determines the price. So how long is training? Is it VR? Is it e-learning? Is it classroom? But the purchaser, our business, our consumers and our managers will determine whether or not it added value for them. So really taking a business-centered view on what learning value should be. Thanks, Jivan. So for those who've heard me present before, you've seen this framework before. So this is our framework. You'll see we apply it to design and delivery from an L&D hat wearer. It also applies to preparation and participation if you are, for example, a line manager or a participant. So it starts with what does success look like, classic Kirkpatrick, but really making sure that we are always focused on what the end result should be and we don't get caught up in sexy experiences that just can become sometimes expensive waste. So thinking of learning as a map, it's only valuable if you know where it is you're trying to get to. Otherwise, you're just kind of lost in the woods, really. So in terms of, we have 4 learning effectiveness levers, and the reason they're called levers, those coloured boxes, is because we adjust them according to the development solution or the learning that we're talking about. So we will sometimes consider the alignment, so making sure that it's linked to what the individual needs, what the team needs, the organisation needs, so their plans, their operational plans, their strategic plans, their targets. So we don't define those, we tap into what the business has. And we measure things like by asking, we don't try and get too scientific, is how aligned is this to your development plan, or how aligned is this to the team's needs, and we will look at relevance. And so that's one of the things that we measure. Of course, we also need to set results at all of the levels, but first and foremost, we track application. So we know that if it wasn't used, if the learner doesn't report using the training on the job, we already know it can't have value and we need to fix that problem first. We also ask if it added value to their ways of working. For our high strategic value programs, we measure development gaps closed. So before they come, we use our competency frameworks. Again, nothing specific to development, tapping into what's there. They say what their current proficiency level is and what their target is. And we set objectives for the solution and whether or not that's closed. And we're not quite there yet, but our next phase is to link to organisation KPIs. Important here to say that this is about correlation, not causation or calculating ROI. For example, do we see higher promotion rates or retention rates linked to when people come to certain programs versus general population? So there are so many variables in our ever-changing world that we're not having negotiations about 5% of sales increase is linked to a training program. We don't see the value in that, but we will look for patterns and relationships, and that will also lead to some of the predictive analytics work that's happening in our HR space. Readiness is applied to only when we have high strategic value. It gives us the opportunity to plug any holes early to make sure people are committed, they've bought into what they should be doing differently, and they're confident that they can. If they're not, of course, we can start to track that and address it, and if we see that consistently, change the program. Finally, reaction, we still care if they liked it and they were engaged and felt the delivery was positive, but we don't focus on that as the primary indicator of success. Operational efficiency, we all care about that, our utilisation rates, and the arrows are indicating, I guess, the flow of when we apply each measure or consider each activity. So quite a rapid run through there, but I hope that made sense.
It did.
And you can see it applies to all of our learning. So how do we do that? We apply scale and scope. Thanks, Jivan. Next slide. By having a one approach for all sizes rather than one size fits all. So what you see here is we call them learning effectiveness types. It is art, not science, although we do have characteristics that sit behind this. So they consider, when we map a development solution in our learning management system, we consider the individual or team impact that's expected and the organisation impact, which can be influenced not just by what's changing, but how many people are changing. So in our factory environment, a small change made by many of our factory team members could lead to an expected impact on KPIs such as safety and quality. So you can see here the different levers that we apply depending on the strategic value of the development solution and what stages of the learning journey, which is a big change for us, focusing on the journey, not the event, saying that how you prepare and what you do afterwards actually has far more impact on value than the actual event itself. So moving away from that. So our focus is maximum value, zero waste. So we do apply it to everything, but in that LL quadrant, which actually accounts for around 67% of our development solutions, it's just a star rating at the end, and at 30 days we ask a single question that says, I used it, I did or I didn't use learning, and it added or didn't add value to my ways of working. So we track it with 2 single clicks 30 days apart. So we're looking to optimize automation more, and what it allows us to do is to answer 4 key questions for every development solution that we have, so every structured development solution that we have, but including coaching and mentoring. We'll be able to see what people are choosing. Obviously, the system tells us that. We'll be able to see if they liked it versus their star, based on their star rating. Did they apply it, and did it add value? So really taking, when we do training planning, we'll be able to see when are we most likely to get application, when training happens when, and challenge requests for certain training. We'll be able to say people say they want MOOCs or they want virtual, but what we see is that they ultimately don't apply it, or they ultimately say it didn't add value. So it's giving us quite simple yet powerful insights about what's happening to our learning. I think I might have one more slide, Jivan. I'm greedy like that. So just to give you a quick reality check, we have had lots of challenges. So these are really simple questions to ask. You can see here we use lots of technology in Nestle. Our challenge is making sure that we can extract and report on all of that information, and we've actually been having a lot of discussion just this morning about calculating the learning journey, and what we want to do is of course stack that star rating, which happens at one point in time, against the application and added value, which happens at another point in time, as an example. So really that's been a challenge for us from a system technical point of view, and from a change management point of view, getting people to think about the journey and have a broader frame of reference when it comes to timing has been interesting. Getting L&D to move from a tactical mindset to a more strategic one is also interesting, but definitely one that many of our markets are up for the challenge. And they like to have a more intelligent conversation with the business than they do today.
Thank you, Vanessa. And as usual, I think we could just do a webinar on what you have to present. But I think just from watching this your craft develop, I think it's just great how it's so practical, pragmatic, and kind of not too over-engineered. So we'll definitely have to organize another webinar to hear you out. But I think just a question to Ben. Ben, what are you seeing in terms of, what kind of Vanessa's kind of advocating here is kind of start with the success criteria or the success picture, and then work backwards, and it kind of makes it more, I guess, easier to measure. Not only easier, but I think more relevant measurement. So I'm just wondering if you've come from working with clients. What are you observing in the space of measurement?
Well, I think so. I think a lot of clients aren't getting this far. So what Vanessa's talking about is more advanced than what a lot of people are doing. A lot of people are still very much focused on how much the happy sheets effectively as you do your course, and how many hours are people doing, as opposed to how do you measure the outcomes of it. And I really like this follow-up question a month later. I think more people need to be doing those types of things and bringing it back to what your objectives are. And it's I think some of the other organisations that are doing some of this stuff well, they're pairing it up also with the future direction of the organisation. So they'll be mapping, these are the skill sets we see us needing in 6 months' time, in 2 years' time. And they create, I guess, processes for mapping how those skills sit within their organisation. So badge or qualification type of matrices, or using kind of gamification to get points towards different directions. That way. Sorry, I can't hear me clearly. So they're using these kind of other tools to track how they're mapping against that. One of the things, I guess, to the earlier session was that a lot of these things are changing very dramatically at this point. What are the skill sets that people need? So I think having this very, very real time and then follow up on the success of the training is a great way of incorporating all of that. Some of these badge things, they work really well, but they're kind of very much going down a future direction, betting on a future path that the organisation is going to need to take. So.
Thank you, very much for that, Ben. Again, Vanessa and Ben, thanks for your kind of inputs. We'll kind of move on to the next panel, which is around the learner experience imperative. And I'm going to now introduce Mike. Mike is actually in the U.S. and Mike, thank you so much, Mike, to stay up late in the night to stay with us. And what we're going to talk about is about the learner experience imperative, and I think this is going to be a little bit, I guess, free flowing in the sense that I guess we'll just ask a question. Then, Mike, I might actually put you in a bit of a spot and ask you a couple of questions, if you don't mind. But let's share some stats. Again, kind of just coming back to what we discussed in the old panel. 30% of the people we survey said that the availability of learning is decentralizing in the organization. So not on the organization, but my apologies, in the organization. 28% said it's centralizing around the LMS or the portal. 42% said it's more or less the same as before. And 30% said it's decentralizing. So this again kind of goes back to the point that we're discussing with all the panelists, was the fact that this controllable, this beast that we call learning L&D, which was quite controlled, is actually becoming decentralized and dispersing and creating all sorts of challenges for an L&D function that has been set up for a very controlled world. And I think that's where we are finding a lot of friction there. And I think I guess I want to just get in Mike now. So Mike, if you just want to kind of quickly introduce yourself and just to talk a little bit about Cognizant. And just talk to us about what's happening in the Cognizant University.
Well, so thank you very much for inviting me, and Jivan and I go some time back. I've joined Cognizant about a year and a half back. I'm responsible for developing one of its fastest growing parts of the organization, the digital business part, which focuses on everything from artificial intelligence all the way through Internet of Things, analytics, interactive marketing, and goes all the way into a lot of very obscure areas like digital anthropology. Just to put it into really terms that a lot of folks that are from L&D that can sort of understand here, in the last year we have about 1,700 skills that are part of this group, this workforce, which is about 36,000 people out of our 270,000 people globally. And of those 1,700, we added approximately 800 new skills last year. And the shelf life of these skills are getting shorter. In fact, some of them are lasting less than 2 years. So a design approach that takes 6 months is completely useless anymore. And so as a certain challenge, as skills shelf life become a lot more challenging, the opportunity to act upon this and to provide the kinds of capabilities that our clients need for digital transformation really requires us to take a completely different approach than what we've done before, an approach that really presumed that knowledge wasn't changing as fast. And so,
Mike, sorry, can I just
yep.
just jump in? I think people are finding your volume a bit low, so just wondering if you could either come closer to the mic and
Yep.
speak that way.
Not a problem. Is this a little bit better for folks?
Not that much. Not really.
How
because
about?
I've kind of just
Is this?
yeah, this works very well. Yeah, that's brilliant.
Okay, I'll hold it right here.
Alrighty.
So really just to, three main points that I tried to raise there is that we're a company of 270,000 people. The area I focus on is 36,000 folks that are responsible for everything from artificial intelligence through Internet of Things, digital marketing, and all things in between. As a consequence, it takes about 1,800 skills for these 36,000 people to be successful. And of those 1,800 skills, we added 800 of them last year alone. And we're expecting to add a new 600 and to get rid of approximately 450. So that type of change is just something that does not, the model that we've presumed in L&D just doesn't work with that kind of rate of change. And so I think that one of the real challenges we've had is we have to give up this notion of end-to-end control, but we have to actually have better sense of what really matters and how to make sure that you're focused on that. So in this way, we're being forced merely by the way that digital transformation is requiring us to be ready for our clients' needs. And as a consequence, it's forcing us to take a completely different tack.
So, Mike, thank you very much for that. And just a question around obviously you've got an audience whose skill sets are changing pretty quickly. So you just need to be very nimble. And I can understand that if you take 3 months to design something, that skill's already outdated. How much consideration are you how are you capturing the skills required by different people? So, how much of personalized learning are you able to offer given the constraints of the technology that might be available to do that?
So you really have to focus on a completely different way to ask the question. You don't focus on the experience. You find what's available in the market. In many cases, some of the skills that we're looking for, there's no one in the market that's actually built anything. Sometimes there are no assessments, there are no certifications. So instead, what you end up doing is you start taking a different approach where you're focused on, okay, so how can I prove to someone that someone actually has the capability of doing something? And so you design exercises and activities and capture that in some way. And so what you actually end up doing is you encourage more communities of practice and formal mentoring, and you build models that allow people to pursue it at their own times and at their own paces. You also make it visible where other enablement kind of material exists, what certifications do exist, and what the policy is on reimbursement or support for certifications. In a certain sort of way, you're giving up control over the end-to-end because you can't operate at that speed. And I believe that this is probably a place that a lot of us are moving toward as things change so rapidly and as the opportunity for automation changes the way that we, some of the routinizable type of activities that most of us do on a daily basis. In fact, it's estimated that Harvard Business Review did a study of this, approximately 50% of what CEOs do globally could be automated away, and that's the CEO. So at a certain point, you start to wonder where exactly, how do you start to add that value, where that sort of the human touch actually matters, and how do you work in partnership with intelligence augmentation? We're not quite yet at artificial intelligence. We have some, but we're really more in the intelligence augmentation phase of this journey. As we move more and more into AI, a lot of this will change very rapidly.
Thank you, Mike. No, that's a great response, and I guess you must be keeping your job really interesting in terms of what needs to happen.
Every day is a new day.
That's what makes us go to the office. So I guess, look, at the beginning of this particular webinar, I did mention that LearningCafe had gone quiet for the past 8 months. I'll be very honest, it's looked like Groundhog Day to me. We're kind of having this webinars and conferences for the past 5-6 years. And it was pretty much this, we talked about the same thing and conceptually, and I was just getting a little bit disillusioned that, while we kind of talk about the future of learning and future of work, in actual reality, nothing was happening on the ground. And I just saw the same old approaches and the same old. So while the desire was there wasn't really any solid movement. So I guess for the past 6 to 8 months, I've been now consulting with organizations and helping them graduate to a more flexible and a user-centric approach. And as part of that, yeah, that's right, Brad. It's like shouting in the wind. So, and I think this is where I guess the disconnect is that our world of L&D has been built, which is I'm talking about people, skills, processes, what we get rewarded upon, is kind of built around that controlled and structured world of learning. And we've rapidly moved into a world which is microlearning dispersed. And to be honest, learner has a lot of control. So we've kind of lost control of getting people in a classroom, making them sit through 2 days of training. Now they can do online if they want to, and we can't really force them if they don't want to. So while they learn the world of mandatory, so basically our infrastructure is based on mandatory learning, and the world's changed to discretionary and personalized learning, and that's where I think we're really suffering. So, from a current state, as you can see on the slide, where we're kind of really business-centric, business requirements, and we get the requirements, the learning partners react to those requirements and build a topic-centric or event-centric or a requirement-centric solution, right? And I've kind of been a little bit been working on a different approach, and this is because no matter what we do, the reality is that our learners have less time, and this is a very famous infographic based on Burst and Deloitte. So the reality is that if we do more things and even do them well, the reality is people actually don't have time to consume all that. So in a way, do we kind of need to be smarter to produce less learning that's more relevant than more learning? But our traditional KPIs are very much based on course completions, and how how the happy sheets, and how many courses have been produced, etc. Maybe it should be how much less time employees are actually spending on learning, because the learning is actually more relevant and more efficient. So with that in mind, I guess what's come in the picture now is kind of learner centricity. So while we still obviously need to be business-centric because we work for a business and they pay our salaries, there's this whole angle of learner centricity to do the stuff that we do, and it's almost giving up on the traditional ways of how we've done things, which is identify business requirements from the business, ask the business what learning solution should be produced. So let's say it's a classroom, and then build that solution and then dump it on the learner. And in that journey, we actually haven't kind of asked the learner what they really require. Sometimes the business gets it quite wrong. So between us and the business, it's I just find that we've kind of made too many assumptions because the world of learning and the learner has changed. So with that in mind, what we've been experimenting now is what we call the workforce experience, and it's kind of all around user experience applied to learning and HR, right? But the time that we're going to spend on now in the next, we're going to focus on is really workforce experience. Learner experience happens to be part of that, but we also recognize that, we kind of talk learner experience is part of the whole employee experience. So, very much is a focus around that. What makes it up is really user-centered design. Go back to the learner. And so go back to the business and also your stakeholder to really understand what is required, and everything that the panel mentioned, about, and then also when I mentioned about measuring the right thing, is kind of using the Agile method, user-centered design, which actually means that we go back to the user and ask them exactly what they want, and then try and balance them with what the business requires, but also understand what the workforce motivation and engagement dynamics are, right? So, if the, for example, GM is firing 15% of its workforce, right? Do not expect the engagement score to go up because we're offering more learning. So we just need to kind of understand that we are in the bigger picture. So it's kind of a move to very much a different, different way of thinking. And with that in mind, what we're working on is, with that in mind, one of the examples that I want to talk about, and Brad has been across, and we also talked about knowledge management on the chat. And this is where I say, as a consultant coming in with fresh eyes, is that we're talking about micro learning and content curation, exactly the same thing that knowledge management folks are talking about. And to be honest, I haven't really found too many organizations where the learning people now talk to the KM, they're silos and they do their own thing. The reality is that we are actually now talking about the same thing, and so probably the functions need to be combined because we're aiming for the same thing. I think the discipline and the science of KM can be combined with the learner and business responsibility of learning. But usually KM reports to the business and learning is in HR and they don't talk. So it's just one of the manifestations of, I guess, a little dysfunctionality that's happening in some organizations. One of the questions that we talked about was around Agile. Now, this is from, again, last year, but essentially 98% of people felt that Agile and traditional learning design approaches can be mixed, right? But I'm coming more to the view that we kind of just need to be careful when we mix them up, not fall into the trap of doing things the same old way just because we are used to it. And I've seen in some organizations where they've gone user-centric Agile, building prototypes, and kind of doing Scrum runs, and coming up with a product, being applied. So, I think that's the change that's happening. I've seen that now. L&D haven't done too well in adoption of Agile, and even those who haven't implemented the true spirit of Agile, for example. So it's something that we kind of need to pick up. So I think one of the things that I did want to announce today is the Workforce Experience Alliance. The website is WEX Alliance, wexalliance.com, and this is kind of almost this is a community who are going to advocate and develop the science of developing a workforce and learning experience using a different set of tools and approaches. At the same time, still keeping the commerciality, the commercial realities, also blending in the HR frameworks and other motivations. So, please do sign up there. And the website is there. There's a mailing list. If you can sign up for that, that'll be kind of fantastic. So I think this is one of the questions that I want to also pose to Mike a little bit afterwards. But one of the observations is that we've talked about L&D capability, and there are a lot of comments about in the chat that and the whiteboard that we need to build our own capability. I think Ben indicated and Mike's also indicated that the jump is different and probably more steep, coming from our current skill base. So if you look at what's on your slide, we kind of had the jump from face-to-face to online learning mandatory courses, and we've kind of come to the end of that, right? So we'd be pretty well catered for that. Now we're kind of in the process of making the jump to kind of social collaborative based learning, more controlled by the user, generated by the user, controlled by the user, and I think we're kind of struggling there because just we've got chatter and we've got SharePoint, and all of a sudden this learning is being dispersed and you got no control and you can't plan for it. So, I think that's what Mike indicated, is that you got to let go of control and kind of just become more adept at being nimble and making learning, recognizing where learning is happening, creating an environment for that. And finally we're going to get to self-organizing learning, and maybe we become redundant there because the learners themselves can organize learning and deliver it. So, hey Mike, question for you: do you kind of find that this is one of the challenges with our L&D folks in community, is that they're finding it difficult to jump from their current capability to one that requires a very, very different skill set?
It's exactly the case, and I think that it really comes down to fear. Jevin, it's basically a lot of us are more comfortable doing the thing we know how to do, and so therefore we try to make what needs to happen into what we know how to do, rather than looking at what needs to happen and stepping back and thinking about whether we need to behave or act differently. And so this is a challenge for all of us, not just our employees, but those of us in HR as well. As HR itself becomes has a lot more capability as more technologies become available for diagnosing problems. We're going to have a lot more ability to automate away routinizable tasks. Problem is that these kinds of routine tasks make us, comfortable, and we have to actually give that up. So it's a real challenge, and it's a human-based challenge. It's a culture challenge, and you don't you don't address culture challenges with reason. You have to actually work on an emotional level. And so I think part of the real opportunity and for organizations is to embrace that and find ways to actually bring more human behavior into a digitally transformed organization.
Thanks, Mike. We still got Anish, Ben, Darren's probably still there, and Vanessa also there. I just want to check with you just in terms of, maybe starting with Anish. What are you finding, the makeup of the L&D team changing, and what do you predict the skill sets that we require for the future? Anish or Ben?
Anish. So I think one of the trends we started seeing is a lot of focus on working with communications team, and marketing and branding team, and slowly I'm also seeing a shift within L&D in a way of getting those skill sets to how do you really market some of the content. So that's an interesting one, and how do we really start focusing on learners as consumers of learning. And other aspect I see is a lot of work on human-centered design and having the skills around design thinking, which we spoke about somewhere around co-creation, and how do we bring business into these discussions and using a leader-led approach and stuff like that. So I see these two trends, interesting ones in terms of skills around marketing, and other one is around human-centered design thinking.
So Anish and also Mike, just a question to you, and also Ben, if you can jump in, and Vanessa, if you're around, is that when we kind of talk about these campaigns and marketing, do we kind of need to have that capability in the team, or do we just kind of leverage the marketing team that's already there? So, I'm just wondering whether we kind of need to. Yeah, go for it.
Yeah. So I honestly think that actually that capability of shifting towards a mindset that's a lot more campaign oriented is actually a really important thing. There's something that Vanessa said in the chat window that I kind of want to underline. It's about transforming behavior and ultimately to produce better performance. And performance doesn't happen, you learn something and all of a sudden everything's different. You have to practice it. You have to keep performing it. And so I think a campaign approach is really an important thing. And I think the real challenge is that you just don't adopt digital marketing tools and apply the tools that are used there for getting people to buy something, to getting people to change their behavior. Else you end up with the kinds of things that don't have the results that you need. So I'll give a very easy example. It's been proven over 20 years of studies that on the outside of cigarette packs that smoking kills you doesn't actually make people stop smoking. Yet we still put it on the outside of cigarette packs. How can we actually apply better approaches to address the human behavior underneath it? Because what we're trying to do is transform the behavior to produce results. And so I think that the key here is really understand the tools and then apply them in the ways that we understand and make things better. I don't know if others have a different point of view on that, but that's mine.
Sure.
What I would say is whilst I'm a fan of campaigns myself, what I am aware of though is it feels to me counterintuitive to us saying we want a learning organisation and we want a pull approach for learning, because a campaign by its very nature is a push strategy. So for me, where the campaign needs to come in is about focusing on the why and the how of learning rather than the what. And by that I mean I think L&D are very good of saying we have a course for this, we have a course for that, but we're not so good at doing the alignment piece and understanding why it exists and why we need it or why we need to change it, and getting people to really buy into why they should learn and not passively wait for someone to develop them, but actively go and do it themselves, and certainly do campaigns about what is available. So I guess I am a fan of campaigns, but I would put a lot of some caveats around that, because we actually ultimately want people to own this for themselves, and L&D to be enablers, having changing our conversation around learning about why do we do it and how should it change what we do, rather than what is it that we have available.
But it's like, I think that's what I love about the LearningCafe discussions is that we've got a diversity of opinion, and I'm kind of aligned a little bit with you because at the same time we do need campaigns and to make people aware that stuff is there. But almost my view is that learning should be invisible. So it's just like you use, Microsoft Office. If you want to use something, it's there and you use it. And that's why I am not sure that we, I guess we need to be. My view is that we probably don't need to be visible superstars, but more like accountants, kind of this learning happening in the background, and it becomes the kind of the circulatory system of an organization. So certainly kind of agree with somewhere in the middle of both points. Do need campaigns because there's so much content around that we just need to be aware, and not only just not learning. It's people are overwhelmed with a lot of change initiatives and a lot of information. So it's quite an interesting point. Just wondering, Ben, if you had any kind of last thoughts before we finish off.
Well, I think just the question that you asked a minute ago around the skill sets, I think that it's very important. There is a much bigger blend now within the teams, communication, management, all bring skill sets, and whether or not it's in the learning.
Oh, Ben, can I just get you closer to the mic? Thanks.
Sorry. Yep. There needs to be a recognition that that these skill sets need to be available to the learning team. So they don't necessarily need to be employed by it, but very much within a learning framework and how you're picturing your learning skill sets within your organization. You need people who can do video, you need people who can do animation, you need people who can do really quick micro-learning content and edit it quickly. There's all these different skill sets that will need to be pulled in. It's a much broader skill set than someone who can use Adobe Captivate or whatever the e-learning tool set that you've got, and the full set. Talked about earlier on just the distribution of learning and the informal learning opportunities. There's a lot more skill sets needed in order to pull all this together into a smoothly functioning enterprise-wide function.
Thank you, Ben. And looks like I guess we've probably raised more questions than we've tried to answer in this webinar, but that's a good start. I think this is where we finish, bang on almost 2 p.m. Thank you very much for everyone for participating. Look, there is an rating poll on your screens. If you can rate, that'll be kind of fantastic, and you'll see the results there. So thanks once again, kind of to the panelists. I know, what I love about getting experienced panelists is that there's not much preparation required, makes my job easier, and we have such a great diversity of opinion and insights. So would very much love to have you kind of next year for this. And thanks to the participants who have taken out time from their very busy schedule for a 1.5 hour webinar. But I hope that you've got something from the webinar. And I guess this is where we finish. So enjoy your Christmas break, and we'll see you next year. Do sign up for the Workforce Experience Alliance, which is the wexalliance.com. There'll be some exciting things happening there, and we'll be spending more time on that. So LearningCafe will still continue, but we'll add a dimension to that. Thanks, everyone, and thanks again to the panelists, especially to Anish and Mike, who have participated from overseas. Also to Peter Davis, who's been behind the scenes facilitating the chat. And Vanessa, thanks again. We'd love to have you back, and also to the other panelists who are left, so Murray and also Darren. So thanks, everyone. Take care, and we'll see you next year.